This is an ancient story of fire, about accessing other worlds. If a dark spark ignites the pyre, we may see beyond our thresholds. It's a mystical, a cyclical ending of the Celtic New Year, a witching our ritual of water, earth, air and fire. Where old phantom shapeshifter queens are flanked by fiery ravens, on an earthly scene to be seen, a thinning of the veil, a breach of the heavens. We sense the cold drawn to our bones when autumnal leaves have fallen. So we gather together, leave our homes to see what ghosts and ghouls are coming. Where a mischievous Far Jarrig will be lit by a Celtic knot, riding on the back of a stag like a nightmare you forgot. But the Boyne flows strong with courage, and Goddess Bowen inspires light. From her salmon we get knowledge, and a hazel tree gave new insight. Druids gather to ward off evil. Atop a ring fort on the Hill of Ward, these tales are ancestral, primeval, and told still by every bard. The pooka is a changeling spirit with lagomorphic golden eyes, who knows your very darkest secret, and with good and bad takes no sides. We all must face the dark sometimes and live in the liminal space. When on October dusk and dawn rhymes, the earthly rhythm changes pace. Where no spirit can be vanquished, it's a supernatural sight. Now all but one flame is extinguished on Iha Hewan, our darkest night.
Diagweeb got dinner. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ronan Gargan, the Ambassador of Ireland to Hungary, and you're very welcome to this evening's celebration of Halloween, hosted by the Embassy of Ireland in Budapest, and joined by an audience across Central Europe, and co-hosted by our colleagues in the Embassy of Bratislava, Prague, Vienna and Warsaw. Tonight is a celebration of Halloween, and in fact Halloween has its origins in Ireland, so we're also celebrating the home of Halloween, Ireland. Halloween was originally a Celtic festival called Samhain, and on that night the Celts marked the end of the harvest and brought in the winter. Many of the traditions of modern Halloween came from that festival, including the carving of pumpkins, but then it was turnips, the lighting of bonfires, and the wearing of masks in order to ward off evil spirits, or púca. The tradition of trick-or-treating also started in that Celtic festival. And it was Irish immigrants moving to America and across the world that brought those traditions. And now today we have modern Halloween. To celebrate Halloween this evening, we've decided to mark it by another great tradition in Ireland, storytelling. So tonight we're joined by Róisín Murphy and our friends in the Leprechaun Museum in Dublin to tell some spooky tales about Halloween and Irish myths and legends and folklore, all centred around our festival of Samhain. We'll also have a sprinkling of videos that explain further the origins of Halloween, and some haunting music from the well-known Irish band Clonard. So without further ado, please sit back, enjoy and prepare to be scared by these tall, spooky tales of Halloween.
Hello everybody, thank you all so much for joining me here today. You're all very welcome to this very special spooky story for this Halloween season. My name is Róisín and I invite you all to snuggle up and maybe clutch your favourite teddy just in case you get a bit too frightened. Many years ago, there was a village in the west of Ireland called pooka, and the people who lived there were always quite frightened of a mysterious otherworldly creature who lived in the mountains and hills nearby. Oftentimes they'd hear a wild and lonesome cry late at night, and they would nod to one another and say, the black pooka is at it again. From the few sightings, people had come to know the black pooka as a wild, ferocious dog with black shaggy hair, wild, ferocious eyes, and sharp teeth like knives. In fact, everyone was so frightened of the black pooka, they swore never to go out into the hills and mountains alone at night, in fear of running into him. The old Shanachie of the town, named Jamesy, always warned the people that he said, you have nothing to fear of the black pooka. If you don't harm him, he won't harm you. But nobody quite believed him. Even his own son, a strong middle-aged farmer who feared nothing, once found himself out alone at night in the mountains, and he swore that he could hear the soft patter of footsteps chaperoning him all the way home. And when he finally arrived back, all the colour had drained from his face. He was white as a ghost, and his hands were shaking, and they didn't stop trembling for 2 days after that. Now Jamesy had a grandson named Connor who lived 2 villages over, and he loved to visit his grandparents in the town of pooka. And one year he received a brand new bicycle for his birthday. It was perfect because the train station was an 8-mile journey from the town of pooka, far too long for a child of his age to make on foot. And so the bicycle granted him this freedom to go down and visit his grandparents any time he pleased. And so for his Halloween break from school, he decided to spend it with his grandparents. On his brand new bicycle, he cycled all the way from the train station back to the house, and he had the most wonderful few days on the lead up to Halloween with his grandparents, carving pumpkins and planning his Halloween costume. When, finally, Halloween came about, and that day Connor and his grandmother decided to bake lovely pumpkin spice cupcakes for the trick-or-treaters later that evening. But when they were halfway through baking, they realised they had run out of half the ingredients they needed to continue. And his grandmother looked at the clock and she thought she'd never have time to get over to the next village where the closest shop was and back in time before the trick-or-treaters arrived. When Connor said, I know, I can take my brand new bicycle. I'll be so quick with that. I'll be back before you know it. But his grandmother thought, these days are very short, she said, and what we don't want is you to be stuck up in those mountains after dark in fear of running into the black pooka himself. Oh, don't worry, said Connor. I'll be so quick, I'll be back long before dark. And so his grandmother agreed. She gave him a list and off he went on his bicycle over the mountain to the next village. And when he arrived, the shop was rather busy, much busier than he had anticipated, but still he waited his turn, glancing at the comics, when finally the shopkeeper, with a nod of recognition, took Connor's list and began to fill up the bag with all of the supplies his grandmother had asked for. And when he was done, he even dropped in a free comic book as a Halloween treat. Connor thanked him and off he went on his way. When he got out of the shop, he couldn't believe it, but his bike had disappeared. He was sure he had left it in that exact spot, but it wasn't there. When all of a sudden he could hear mocking laughter coming from around the corner. He ran around to see who was there, but nobody was there at all. It was empty. He was sure now that his bike, his most prized possession, had been stolen. And he ran up and down the streets, down the lanes and alleyways in search of it, but it was nowhere to be seen at all until eventually, at dusk, he slumped down onto the ground, crying bitter, salty tears. And he knew he'd never see his bike again. a sudden he looked up at the sky and he realised darkness was fast approaching. He had to go as quickly as he could, when he knew at this stage it was very unlikely that he would reach home before darkness fell. He picked up the grocery bag and carried it. It was rather heavy. He had to change it from one hand to the next to rest his hand all the way over the mountain. When finally he reached the top of the hill, the moon came out over the mountains. It was so dark at this stage, he could hardly see 2 steps in front of him, and his breath began to quicken. He walked as quickly as he could, and he was sure he could hear the sound of footsteps behind him. He stopped and glanced over his shoulder, but there was nobody there. He began to quicken his pace, and he was sure that those footsteps were keeping pace with his own. Then he thought he could hear the sound of soft breathing. He stopped and looked over his other shoulder, but there was nobody there, except in the bushes he was sure that he could see the rustling of leaves. He took a quick, sharp inhale of breath. Terrified now, he began to break into a run, running as fast as he could, trying to clutch the grocery bag before him, and he ran and ran, glancing over his shoulder every now and then, until eventually he stumbled, dropped the grocery bag down in front of him, tripped over the bag and fell headfirst into the ditch on the side of the road. As he turned over, there looming over him was a great, big, dark, ominous figure of the black pooka himself. He had wild, ferocious eyes, foaming at the mouth. He opened his jaws wide when Connor let out a great, big shriek, but he was so afraid not a single sound left his mouth. He turned away from the black pooka, covering his face, sure that these would be his last few breaths, when just at that moment, unbeknownst to Connor, his Uncle Tom was not far away at all on his horse, out in search for his nephew. And they were just about to cross the bridge. Tom heard the loud cry of his nephew Connor. "Quick," he said to the horse, "hurry along." But the horse let out a very soft whimper, cowed down, and refused to take another step. Tom didn't waste another minute. He jumped off the horse, grabbed the biggest, sharpest stick he could find, and ran towards the sound of the cry. When finally he reached Connor and the black pooka standing over him, he grabbed the stick and whooshed it towards the black pooka. "Hey," he said, "get away from my nephew." But just as he hit the black pooka, the stick met no resistance at all, and it went right through him, as though the black pooka weren't even there, like he was swatting a ghost. And the black pooka turned towards Tom and he said, "You have no reason to hit me with that stick, Tom. I mean you no harm." Connor and Tom couldn't believe their ears. What, a talking dog? They said to themselves. They had never seen anything like it in all their lives. And all of a sudden, all their fear and rage melted away in an instant. And the black pooka's terrifying eyes didn't look so terrifying after all. In fact, they seemed quite kind. And the black pooka said, "I really mean you no harm. All I want to do is help. You see," he said, "I haven't always taken the shape of a black pooka. Many years ago, I used to be a man just like you," he said. "I was a very wealthy farmer in the north of Ireland. I had hundreds of cows to my name. When one year a terrible sickness fell on all the cows and many of them died. And without the milk, a lot of the people in the village began to die. I, however, being wealthy, had a good supply and I had no need to worry. And one night, a cold and wet, wild night, I was snuggled up warm and cosy in my bed when I heard a loud thumping on the front door, and it was an old woman, widowed, with a tiny baby in her arms. Her granddaughter, the only family she had left, was so sick she was begging for milk for the little child to make it through the night. But I, the black pooka said, was so warm and cosy. I was too lazy to get up out of bed to help her. And the next morning, I got word that that child had died during the night. And I had an overwhelming sense of guilt, he said. Shortly after that, I died myself. And my afterlife was cursed from that moment on, he said. I was forced to wander these hills in this sorry state, hoping to find someone in need of help so that I could redeem myself by finally lending a helping hand. But every time I see anyone, he said, they run away terrified, and I never even get a chance to say hello. And Tom felt so sorry for the poor black pooka. All those years the townspeople had been so afraid of him. And he said, I really wish I could help, but I'm afraid there's nothing that we need. Except, Connor said, my bike! Someone stole my bike and I have no idea where it is. Ah, the black pooka said, I heard your cries earlier this evening, and I must say, your bike might not be as far away as you might think. And so he turned and trotted towards the bushes, and when he emerged, he had Connor's bike between his teeth. My bicycle! Connor said, you found it! Oh, thank you, he said 1,000 times, thank you. And the black pooka smiled at Connor and he said 1,000 times, you're welcome. He nodded to Tom and Connor, and then he turned and walked through the gates of the farm as though they weren't even there. And when Connor and Tom arrived home that night and told their friends and family about what they had seen, the people of Glenafuca weren't so afraid to go out at night in the mountains anymore. And from that day on, there was never another sighting of the black pooka ever again in those mountains. And all the people of Glenafuca lived a very happy lives. And that was the story of the not so scary black pooka. Thank you all so much for joining me, and have a very happy Halloween.
As we all know, Samhain was a very interesting time of year. The veil between our world and the She would almost completely disappear, allowing the fairies to come out of their hills, stalking the night, and the souls of the dead to return from their graves. Sometimes they'd even come home and expect to find dinner waiting for them. Because it was. We were expecting them, and we'd have dinner prepared. But the Samhain was a time for feasting. Some people believe it comes from the Irish for summer's end, and we know that it definitely marked the start of the Old Irish New Year. As was New Year, it was a time for celebration and feasting. And so one year, in Róisín, in Connacht, King Ailill and Queen Maeve were throwing a feast for their finest warriors. Everyone was there, boasting of their great deeds and prowess. And this tends to happen at feasts. Everyone was getting a little bit too drunk. Eventually, King Ailill had an interesting idea. He stood up tall, raising his goblet, and looked out on his crowd. Gentlemen, anyone who will go out and tie a withy around the ankle of one of the 3 captives we hung last night shall have any gift they desire from me. The hall fell silent. It was Samhain. They knew the dark night was dark and full of terrors. And so, no one stirred, until Queen Maeve cast a withering eye over the crowd. She smirked. Not one of you. Shamed by their queen, some of the men got up, and one by one they ventured out into the night, shaking with fear. Not long would pass before, returning, shaking even worse from the fear, they'd come in, not meeting their companions' eyes, they'd each take their seat again. Until one of them stood up. I'll go. This was Nera, a handsome young warrior, still ripe in his youth, wanting to prove himself. Very good, said Alio. You will have my gold-hilted sword if you succeed. He handed the withy to Nera, and he set off into the night after putting on his battle garb. Each step he took towards the gallows began to feel like he'd made a mistake. You could see them there swinging off the tree. 3 men. As he approached, he thought he could see one of them move. He went up with the withy and tied it around the ankle of one of them with long black hair. But it sprang off immediately. Cursing under his breath, he bent down, picked up the withy and tried to tie it again. But once again it sprang open. For a third time, he bent down, picked up the withy, but as he was about to tie it around the corpse's foot, it spoke. You'll never get that attached without a proper peg in it, it said. And Nera had to admit, corpse probably knew what it was talking about. So he cut a little hole in the withy, weaved it through, tied a hook in it, and it was done. Well done, Nera, said the corpse. Well done indeed, said Nera. But tell me now, said the corpse, would you mind doing me a favour? Before I was banged up, I had an awful thirst on me. What say you and I go get a drink together? Fair enough, said Nera. Only climb on my back and I'll take you there. He then cut down the corpse from the tree. It slid onto his back, locking its arms about his neck and its legs gripping onto his waist. Corpse on his back, they set off down the road until they soon came to a house. As they approached the house, a ring of fire sprang up all around it and the corpse hissed. Nah, no, can't go in there. There won't be a single drop of drink for us. Try the next one. So they moved on to the next house. But this time, as they approached, a ring of water sprang up all around, threatening to drown them. Ah, no, said the corpse. Can't go in there. Won't be a single drop for us. So they moved on to the third house. As they approached, no ring of fire, no ring of water sprang up. And he could hear the corpse smiling beside his ear. Ah, yes. This one will do. It was nearly completely black when they entered that house. No light from a candle, no light from the fire. But as their eyes adjusted to the dark, Nera could see a family. 3 of them, mother, father, and young child, sleeping in a bed. The corpse slid down off of Nera's back, and crawling along the floor, it went over to a bucket in the corner. Lifting up the slop bucket, it took a deep, healthy gulp of the dirty foot water and swallowed it down. He lifted it up again, took a long, deep gulp and lowered it down. And for the 3rd time, he lifted up the slop bucket. And as he drained the last few drops, he held them in his mouth. Turning to the sleeping couple, he then spat it out. And as the water landed on their skin, their veins ran black. They turned cold and died. The corpse slid atop Nera's back. They left the house and journeyed back to the gallows. Nera swung him up from the tree and returned to Cruachan. But as he approached the hall of Cruachan, he saw it was aflame. Looking around him, he saw the countryside was alive with an army, slaughtering all they found. When he entered the hall of Cruachan, he saw that all of the assembled crowd had lost their heads. The king and queen there on their throne, headless, bleeding. And then he spotted something. The great host that had done this terrible wrong. And he followed them. He followed the strange host as they disappeared underneath the hill of Cruachan. And as they walked along through the passage, they began calling back to each other. There's a human on the road, one would say. and the road is heavier for it, they would reply. Down this went, down the line, until one of the soldiers turned around and faced Nera. "Here's the human on the road," he said. And they all shouted, "And the road was heavier for it." Nera was grabbed and dragged forward down the line until he came face to face with a man on a throne. The king of the wrath of Róisín fixed his eyes on Nera. "Why have you come to my realm?" he asked. Nera explained. He'd found the host while returning home and followed them under the hill. "You will go now to a woman," said the king. "She will keep you well, and every day you must bring a heavy burden of firewood to my house." He went to stay with the woman, and each day Nera would bring the firewood to the king's house. But each day, as he brought the firewood, he could see a man with no eyes in his head and a man with no legs beneath his waist, colliding on the man's back. These two would go along each day to a well. They'd bend over, and the man on the blind man's back would say, "It's there!" And then they'd leave. One day he asked the woman he was staying with, what were they doing? She explained that inside that well was a great crown, the crown of Brion, one of the greatest treasures of the Sidhe. The king had lamed the man on the blind man's back and blinded the man who carried him to make sure they couldn't run off with it. But then she looked at Nera. "But please, tell me, you've stayed with me for many days now. We've enjoyed many a tender moment together, but I know nothing of your life." And Nera explained who he was and where he'd come from, how he'd once lived in Connacht but had to flee after all the people he'd known had been slaughtered by the army of the Sidhe. She looked confused. "No, Nera. What you saw was a phantom army. That has not yet come to pass. But this will come to pass unless you can stop it. You must go home. Go to your people and warn them about what will happen." "But how can I do that?" said Nera. "I've been here for at least 3 days. They're long gone and dead." She shook her head. "No, Nera. They are still around the cauldron eating their feast. Go now and take the fruits of summer, wild garlic and primrose, to prove that what you saw was true." And so he left. Out of the Sidhe, out of the hill of Róisín, he returned to the great hall of Maeve and Ailill. And as he approached the hall, he could hear the sounds of a lively feast. When he went in, there at the head of the hall, head still on his shoulders, was his king Ailill, who smiled broadly. "Nera, we were beginning to think you'd lost your way. How did it go? I have my gold-hilted sword here for you now." But then he saw the look on Nera's face. And Nera explained what had happened. He told everything of how he had returned to the hall and found everyone dead and entered into the Sidhe. There he had met a beautiful woman who told him to return. And so, before the Sidhe army could attack them next year, Maeve and Ailill and all of their army descended upon the Sidhe, slaughtering them all to a man. They then returned with the great crown of Brion. But Nera didn't return. Oh, he entered into the Sidhe. He took the fairy woman and their new child and went somewhere else. He'll never appear again, for he's happy in the other world.
Samhain is the perfect time for storytelling. And it wouldn't be Halloween without the story of Jack. We have to wonder, who was Jack? Well, Jack was a blacksmith. And Jack came from a family of blacksmiths, though now it was just him and his father since his mother had passed away. His father worked very hard and had built a great reputation, but Jack wasn't his father. Jack liked to cut corners, and his father was always pushing him on it, saying that reputation was everything. And now one day when the father was gone, all of this would be Jack's. But it wasn't much. It was a small holding, a little forge, and a little bit of land tacked onto the side. And of course, the day came when Jack's father had passed away. Jack wasn't too sure that he actually wanted to be a blacksmith, you know. To be honest, he didn't like the idea of working at all. He just liked, keeping to himself, going down to the pub for a few pints and making his way home late at night. But Jack's work was suffering because of his lack of enthusiasm, and people began to blame Jack for little accidents. Maybe just a gate would fall off his hinges. But after a while it got worse. There was stories of carriages coming apart on dangerous bends. In fact, some people pointed the finger at Jack and said he was responsible for a certain number of bad accidents and even a couple of deaths. And the work began to dry up for Jack. And Jack wasn't too bothered about this. He wasn't bothered about his reputation. The only pinch he really felt was when it was getting hard to pay for his few pints. And Jack was fairly miserly and he saved money where he could. He didn't even bother buying food. You see, on his way home from the pub late at night, he would hop into a neighbour's field and just pull a turnip from the ground, and he'd munch on that. But even the buying of pints was getting hard. And Jack didn't have any friends as such. No one really sat with him while he was in the pub, but he made sure that if someone wasn't paying attention, he'd take a sup of their pint. And heaven forbid they should leave a few drops in the glass when they finished up for the night, and Jack was sure to polish them off as well. He generally hung around until he was made feel so unwelcome at the end of the night that he left, make his way home, pluck a turnip from the neighbour's field, and go back and just sit in his chair. Well, there was one year, and it was at Samhain. The darker half of the year was just being born, and Jack was taking the walk on a dark night along the country roads, heading down to the pub. He sat at the table, a table not unlike this one, and ordered himself a pint, looking around with his sneaky little eyes, keeping his eyes open for any opportunities or any unattended drinks that he could help himself to. No one sat with him. No one paid much attention to him. But then the door opened and a stranger came into the pub. A dark, handsome stranger, piercing blue eyes. But no one seemed to be paying attention to him. I mean, Jack had noticed him, but Jack didn't bother looking up. But he knew he was there. But what really got Jack's attention was the fact that the stranger made a beeline, walked straight over to Jack's table and stood right in front of him. And again, no one seemed to notice. "Do you mind if I take a seat here with you, Jack?" said the stranger. And Jack just grumbled and gestured. The stranger sat down across from him. "It's a dark, cold, old, miserable night, Jack, and I just thought I'd seek some shelter." Again, Jack just mumbled and took the last sip of his drink. "Can I get you another one?" Well, that got Jack's attention. Maybe a stranger, may not be a friend, but his money's good. And Jack sat up enthusiastically and said, "Sure, make it a double." The stranger laughed, gestured to the barmaid, who brought down the drinks, and the two men sat together silently. The drinks kept coming. Jack was delighted with himself. But it was getting late, and the bodies in the pub had started to thin out. People had set off for home. And then Jack piped up. He said to the stranger, "Do you think I don't know who you are? You don't think I'd be suspicious when a man dressed as finely as you comes in here and seems to be able to spend whatever he wants? Do you think I don't recognise the devil when I see him?" Well, the stranger laughed, sat back in his chair, and he said, "Jack, you are indeed a clever one. If only you hadn't wasted your life, put that brain to good use, I wouldn't be here. But Jack, it is time for me to come and claim your soul for all the wrong that you've done." Jack was like, "That seems fair. Sure, I wouldn't want to go the other way anyway. I'd get an earful from my parents, so I'll go with you. But would you do me a favour," he says. "Can I just get one last drink?" The stranger laughed, but when he looked in his purse, he saw that it was empty. "I'm afraid, Jack," he says, I've no more coin on me, but it is late and it is time that we get going." Jack was disappointed, to say the least. Said to the stranger, he says, "Listen, if you truly are the devil, it would be nothing to you to turn yourself into a nice silver coin and sit there on the table, and I could get myself another drink. Consider it my final wish." The devil laughed, and Jack didn't know whether he blinked or he was distracted, but the next thing he knew, the stranger was gone, the chair was empty, but the coin sat on the table. Jack didn't spend the coin. Jack took the coin, he spit on his thumb, and he pinned the coin to the table, and he leaned in, and the coin was vibrating under his thumb. And Jack was like, I'm not going to let you go from here. You're not going to be able to change back. I will keep my thumb on you until I am past and my soul is gone. And even when the coin seemed to get hot against Jack's skin, he still didn't stop. Jack said, if you agree to give me another year, I'll release you. Reluctantly, and without a sound, the devil agreed. Well, Jack picked up the coin, held it tight in his fist, and he made his way towards the door. And as soon as he got outside, he turned and he threw that coin up the road. And Jack ran off in the opposite direction. He was only a few steps gone when he could hear this dark, low cackle coming from the road behind him. But Jack knew that the devil was a man of his word, so he felt safe. And his run turned into a trot and then into a walk as he came to his neighbour's field. Jack hopped the wall, plucked a turnip from the ground, and ate on his way home, falling asleep in his armchair when he got there. And a year passed. The year passed, and Jack didn't mend his ways. Not at all. Not a bit of them changed. And when Jack was sitting there waiting in the seat the following year, there was no sign of the stranger. He was waiting for the door to open and to come and sit at the table. Maybe you can get a few more drinks out of him, but it never happened. So when the end of the night came and Jack polished off his drink, he set off into the dark, cold night, and as he walked down the street, fairly happy with himself, but at the same time a little disappointed that he didn't warrant the attention. But as he came to his neighbour's field, he saw leaning against the wall the dark, handsome stranger. Ah, my old friend Jack, said the devil. Had you thought I'd forgotten about you? No, I just wasn't much in the mood for socialising tonight. But I think on a cold night like this, it's time for me to get you somewhere just a little warmer. Jack was happy to walk with him for a while, and the two men strode along like old friends. Jack just prattling on and talking, not panicked, perfectly relaxed. As he walked by another field, he said to the devil, listen, he says, in that field over there grows an apple tree. And on that tree grow the juiciest apples in any land. Now I normally hop that wall there and pluck a turnip because there's no way I can climb the tree to get an apple. I'm old and I'm frail. He says, but look at you, you're sprightly. You look fit, wiry, but strong. You wouldn't do us a favour and climb up the tree for me. Just listen, one last favour. Last supper almost. You'd go climb that tree, pluck me an apple, and I'll have that as my final meal. The devil thought Jack was very cheeky to ask again, especially after what happened the year before. But the devil agreed. There was something about Jack that he liked. Well, the two men hopped the wall into the field, and the devil started to climb the tree, reaching for the juiciest red apple. At which point Jack pulled a pocket knife out from his coat and carved a cross into the trunk of the tree. The devil was stuck. He couldn't come down from the tree. He couldn't pass over where the cross was. And Jack laughed. He's like, are you not meant to be clever? I tricked you last time and I've tricked you again. The devil was fuming. He was hissing. He was seething. And Jack said that, well, he says, I could let you down. He says, I could just scratch out this cross and you'd be free to go. The devil said, fine, I'll give you another year. I'll give you 5 years. I'll give you 10 years. Just let me down. Jack said, 5 years, 10 years doesn't make a difference to me. He says, I'd still be going to the same place. I want you to promise me that there will never be a place for me in hell. The devil calmly agreed. He smiled and he gave his word. Jack dragged his knife through the cross, breaking the seal, and the devil jumped down from the tree, meeting nose to nose with Jack. The devil just smiled, turned on his heels and walked away. Jack continued off home, sat down into his chair. And Jack didn't even have another year. It was later that winter when Jack passed away in his seat. And as his soul drifted away, he found that it was going up. But when he got to the pearly gates, he was turned away. He was told that he had never repented, so there was no place for him in heaven. And then he quickly began to fall. The ground beneath his feet was gone. Suddenly he felt the weight of himself and all the wrong he'd ever done as it dragged him down through the clouds and down, through the land, until eventually he found himself on a sharp, harsh ground. Smell of sulphur and a heat. Well, as Jack stood up and brushed himself off, he heard a familiar voice. Jack, my old friend, I never thought I'd see you again. Well, Jack, as I said, he brushed himself off and he says, well, fair is fair, he says. Listen, you won in the end, here I am. The devil said, no, Jack, I gave you my word. I told you there'd never be a place for you in hell. So I'm afraid I can't let you in. With the realization of that, Jack began to panic. He was like, "This is no place for me, and I can't be here. Where am I meant to go? What am I meant to do?" He was terrified. The devil said, "I'm afraid I can't do anything for you. You're a lost soul. Your fate now is to wander the earth. Forever. For always." Tears welled up in Jack's eyes. He's like, "Where am I meant to go? What am I meant to do? It's so dark and it's so cold. I'll never have comfort. I'll never feel warmth again." The devil took pity on Jack. He reached down and he plucked an ember from the floor and he tossed it at Jack. Jack caught it, but as it burned his skin, he looked for something to hold it, and he reached into the pocket of his coat where he had a turnip taken from his neighbour's farm. And Jack pushed the ember deep inside the turnip. His hands blistered and burned, but he could carry that to light his way. He felt himself drift up through the soil, through the earth, and he found himself in a dark, cold, lonely landscape with nothing to light his way but the fires of hell. Good night.
Every October, our city awakes. The Derry air trembles, our ancient walls shake. The veil from this world to the other grows thin as the best Halloween on the planet begins. But to really see why our Samhain reigns supreme, let's return to the very first Derry Halloween. Our story kicks off in the castle bar long before revellers came from afar. It was there, during some of our darkest days, that a fancy dress party set hearts ablaze. Year upon year, we grew in size, as thousands flocked to feast their eyes on homemade costumes stitched with care in our shirt factory city, ready to scare. Each Halloween, stakes got higher and higher, till no one dared turn up in normal attire. Fireworks and a parade joined the mix, a true witch's brew of treats and tricks. Now, 3 nights before Samhain, our walls play host to an epic awakening of ghouls and ghosts. But remember, as spirits lurch through our gates, it's the people that make Derry Halloween great.
I hope you all and your families enjoyed those fantastic scary stories about Halloween and Ireland as the home of Halloween. If you want to learn more about Ireland as the home of Halloween, please visit ireland.com. All that's left for me to do tonight is to thank our contributors, Róisín Murphy, and our friends at the Leprechaun Museum in Dublin. And a special thank you to our colleague at the Embassy of Ireland in Budapest, Kevin Hennessy, who pulled together this fantastic night. And finally, to thank you all for joining us for this special celebration of Halloween. To conclude our festivities tonight, we have a haunting song from the well-known Irish band Clonard. And finally, to wish you and all your family a very happy Halloween. Ihe sound, Fiona Dweeb.
will not lie. The future you and I get blown